How you doing?
Okay.
Good. You want to show up the paper? Okay, let's see. Here, you want to give a countdown? 10, 9, 8.
Put me this here?
You gotta turn it around. Let's see, what does it say?
It says, the Sunday Register, July 22nd, 2007. That is my 75th birthday.
Your 75th birthday?
Right. July 22nd.
Do you mind seeing that, or?
Yeah, this is July 22nd, 2007.
Uh-huh.
And I was born July 22nd, 1932. That would make me 75 years old today.
Alright. Let's see if I can. I'm going to change this a little bit. Let's see if this will.
And that's probably accurate.
This is my first interview, actually.
Because I was born in Germany, so that would be 7 hours later. 10 hours later. So it would be, it would be July 23rd already.
So you're 75 plus in Germany.
Yeah, in Germany. And I think I was born in the morning.
Oh, you think so?
I think so.
And you're the oldest of two girls.
And I'm the oldest of two girls, yes. In 1932, Hitler was just starting.
Mm-hmm. Had he come to power in Munich yet?
Mm-hmm. In 33.
Okay.
Not in 32. When I was born, he was not yet in power. I think it was just still the Weimar Republic. Was that it?
Weimar, I believe.
Weimar, yeah. So
Yeah.
German Weimar.
The German Weimar.
And then I was a little girl, and then, and my parents welcomed my birth.
Yeah?
They did, because they had lost a child before me.
Huh.
To a little boy.
So how long were they married before they had you, do you think?
I think they were married 8 years before they had me.
Mm-hmm.
A long time.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was about 30. Something like that.
Had he graduated from, was he still?
He was going for his PhD. I think when I was born, he must have had his PhD already, but he was working on it while he was director of a home, Lehrlingsheim, for orphan boys, Jewish orphan boys in Germany. And while he was the director, he was going to school, and he was getting his PhD in psychology at the University of Munich.
So how many boys were in the school, do you think?
I don't know. Maybe 40? 30 or 40? There are pictures of my father, with the boys.
And the Lederhosen?
And the Lederhosen. Do you remember that?
I do remember the Lederhosen.
And the reason my father knew that the Gestapo was there is that in 1933, they came to the home. The SS
came to the boys' home?
Came to the boys' home because it was a Jewish home.
Mm-hmm.
And they scoured the whole home, and they found a gun. My father had a gun, and they took it away. So my father knew then, and I guess the Nazis were in all the Hofbrau houses, and in Munich it was very obvious that Jews weren't wanted. And then, so my father knew, that Hitler, that he should get out of Germany. And first they wanted to go to Israel. And I think they sent money to somebody in Israel so that they could go, but the money was used for something else. So, and then my mother knew because she was on a boat. I think she went to Israel in 32, something 33, and there was a Jewish leader who said, "Don't look, just follow my hand. Don't look over there because there's a Nazi over there, and he's looking you over. So just look where." So they knew there were many signs that they should get out of Germany. And then
Because a lot of Jews didn't believe that it was actually going to happen at all.
my grandmother and my aunt, they were living in Karlsruhe, which was a little town. I mean, it wasn't a little town, but it was smaller than Munich, and Hitler had not been in power yet that long. And they stayed, I think, until 1940 almost.
Oh, really? They stayed? But
And
they finally got out.
They did, but my uncle was in Dachau. He was a judge in Karlsruhe. So they put him into Dachau, and he would have died, except my aunt went there, and one of the SS, the Gestapo people, was a neighbor, a young man, and he knew my aunt. So she begged him, and he helped my uncle escape. So that's how my uncle escaped. And when 1940, my parents, we were already in America by then.
Because Dachau was seen as a work camp at that point, so like political people were put there.
Because he was a judge.
Right.
Yeah. And my mother got a little note in her laundry basket saying, "You better get out now." And this was in 35 or 36, because you're on the list for Dachau. And the woman who put that in was the neighbor, whose husband was a Gestapo. So she knew that we were on the list, so my mother knew we had to get out right away. But just before we were going to emigrate, and so she got the papers from my dad. My father left in 35.
Hang up, sorry, just one sec. I'm sorry. Can I change one thing real quick?
Yeah, sure.
You mind getting up for 1 sec? Sorry.
Okay.
We'll let the cameras roll.
All right.
There we go.
I don't think much of Harry Potter. The language in Harry Potter is not very exciting.
Well, do you want to go tomorrow or not?
To Harry Potter?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we'll see it.
Is that mine? Can I have some?
So let's see. Can you set it down here?
Did you turn the camera off?
No, I did not hear. I can pause it and rewind it. Ooh.
What?
Okay. Thank you for your patience, man. A little closer.
No Zoom?
Oh, we've got Zoom. Okay, so that guy over there. Say hello.
Hello?
Let's see, I'll clean myself up a little bit. Hi. Okay. We'll see if that was actually in focus later.
Okay.
So you were talking about your mom and dad.
And my father knew
Julius and Helen
Julius and Helen Feil.
Feil.
My father's name was Julius, and he was a brother of 4 brothers.
Feil is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, I think. And oh, my aunt.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking. my aunt, my father's sister, they stayed in Germany too long, and they died in Dachau. They was murdered by the Nazis. Murdered. And my father never spoke of this, never said a word. Never. I don't even know if he knew that they were murdered by the Nazis.
How do you know?
I found about it from Mr. Appenzeller.
Oh, really? So...
He recorded it in his book. I think 2 sisters were murdered because they didn't leave in time. But my father's mother, my grandmother, Matilda, they left with another sister and went to Johannesburg. South Africa.
Mm-hmm. So there were 4 boys and how many girls?
Must have been 3.
Well.
Because one went with my grandmother and the
Uh-huh.
other 2 were murdered in Dachau.
Mm-hmm.
And my aunt, my mother's sister, and her mother waited a long time, and
Mhm.
my grandmother was about to be stayed. The Nazis didn't want her to go. But my aunt pleaded with them, I guess, and she knew the Nazis, you know, in Karlsruhe, so they let my grandmother, my father, and mother got my grandmother and my aunt and Carl. They had a little son who was just a year old, just born, and they came over in 1940.
So
They lived
Carl's
with
your
us.
cousin.
My first cousin.
Right.
Hmm. And my other cousin, Frank, was born in America, in New York. But the oldest was born. Anyway, in 1933, my sister was born.
Mm-hmm.
She could not be born in a hospital. At that time, no Jewish child should have been born. Now, in Kristallnacht was, I think, 36 or 38. When was Kristallnacht? When they destroyed all. I think that was 38. Because in even in 33 in Munich, we should not have a Jewish child. So my sister had been born secretly. And then when my father went to America, he worked, he was a psychologist, and he worked with children. He got a job as a cottage father, in a, you know, where you stay, you have to live there, in Pleasantville, which was a big home in upstate New York. But
I'm sorry.
for boys that had problems.
I just wanted to make sure we were recording this whole time.
Oh, okay.
I think we are.
All right. Yeah. And he was working there. And then in 36, my mother and my sister and I emigrated. Just before we came to America, my sister got scarlet fever, which then was a very serious, because there was no cure for it, there was no penicillin, and you died from it. And so what they did, they took me in the middle of the night, I didn't even know it, to a friend. I was 3 years old, and I woke up and I found myself high up. I think they took me while I was sleeping. High up, she lived in a high-rise kind of apartment by the Englische Garten, which was in Schwabing, where we lived, which is a suburb of Munich. That's where the University of Munich is. That's where the Lehrlingsheim was.
The what?
The Lehrlingsheim, where the home where my sister was born, and I was born in a hospital, I think. And so I woke up. I think I was 3 years old, and this lady was going over me with a flashlight, whom I hardly knew. She was a friend of my parents. She was looking for the scarlet fever, but I didn't know that. They never told me anything about scarlet fever or why, and all of a sudden there I was, away from my parents in this high place, and looked down, and, you know, and it was scary. But I did get scarlet fever, and so the next thing I knew, we were in a basement of a nun that was of a hospital that was run by nuns, and the nuns hid us, my sister and me, in this hospital.
Had your mother known the nuns before, or?
I think so, because my mother went to school in near Munich, near Breisach, Freiburg, which Freiburg has a very big college, university, and my mother studied there with nuns. So her whole life she was very close to nuns. So she knew, I think she knew these nuns that hid us. And I remember the doctor, they got a doctor there to come down to the basement where they hid us, and they had this saddle-like thing. It looked like a horse's saddle, and it had legs, and they put me on the saddle while the doctor examined me. And they told me I had to be very quiet, otherwise the kinderman, who had a big sack, would put me in a sack and take me away. And I was scared. So we stayed in this basement, and we all were in one bed, which had these pulleys, you know, when sort of people to pull up.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of the night, we were very kosher. My parents were very kosher. So the boys from the home, from the orphanage, brought chicken soup for us, kosher, because we couldn't eat anything in this hospital, because it wasn't kosher. And there were bars on the windows of the basement. And the soup spilled all over us, the hot soup with the noodles, through the bars. They tried to give us the soup. And, but we survived, and then we went, and when we got over the scarlet fever, now this I don't remember, but we took a boat from Munich to Le Havre in France, and then we crossed the channel at Le Havre and went on to New York on a big boat.
So did you go to London first, do you think, or England?
I don't know, I don't know. All I remember is on this boat, it must have been July 4th, because there were big things you popped. You know, those big things that make a big noise.
Or maybe Bastille Day?
I don't know. Maybe it was a French boat. Maybe it was Le 14 Juillet, the 14th.
Hey Claudia, you want to ask Grandma a question?
There.
Yeah, okay.
Just look at it. Just.
Maybe it was Bastille Day. Le 14 Juillet,
Mm-hmm.
14th of July.
So it was in the summer that you...
We must
So
have
Opa
come-
was already here.
He was in New York, but he couldn't live with us because we lived in the Bronx, in Lerting Avenue, which is a house my parents rented, and my mother worked for the Jewish Refugee Service,
Mm-hmm.
which was established by the Federation, the Jewish Federation, to help the children whose parents were killed in the war. And so my mother took some of these children whose parents, like they were torpedoed, and the children were saved, and they were now orphans.
Mm-hmm.
So as a little girl, we had just come over. I lived with these kids who saw their parents being killed, drowned. But I didn't like these kids because I never had my mother. My mother was off working at the Jewish Refugee Service. So I used to make fun of them. There was a little girl called Gwendolyn who was afraid of beetles. And in New York they had bushes where we lived. And we used to take the bushes, we used to pretend there were beetles, and we used to go, beetle, 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 and scare her. And poor Gwendolyn, she would cry and scream. And there was Wooly, the subway rider. And he would ride subways. He just all the time would sit in subways. And so, and when they came to get him, and what we did.
What do you mean came to get him?
Because he would ride subways all the time. So he couldn't stay at our house anymore. So they came, I guess, whoever did come to pick him up and put him, I don't know where. But he was in the bathtub and he wouldn't leave the bathtub. And they had a terrible time getting him, and we cut his hat. He had a hat. We took a razor and cut his hat. They're mean.
You and Gabby?
I don't think she was, I don't know, I don't remember her at all there. When I said we, I don't know who. There was a little boy called Peter, and we used to play soldiers together. I liked Peter. And, you know, there was these little toy soldiers. Now they would be worth a lot of money. And we would take a tennis ball and roll it and play soldiers with Peter. I was like 4 years old.
Were you the older kid of the group, or?
And then my mother got my grandmother and my aunt, both aunts. And they all lived in this house with us.
But not your dad?
No, my father lived with the boys. And we'd see him on weekends. My father loved cars. And he had this little car with a running board. And when we came there, all the boys, they'd say, "Hi, Doc!" And they would all be on the running board, and my father would be driving away. It was fun. Yeah, the boys really loved him, as I recall. And then my father got a job in another place with delinquent girls, where we all lived. And these delinquent girls would make fun of us. And they would blame me for things they did, like they say that I stole oranges, which I never stole. So my mother would say, "How did you steal those oranges? Did you get up on this thing and reach up there?" I said, "That's what I did. I never stole any oranges." And they were really mean, the girls. Like one day, it was my mother's birthday, and we had a present already. We were behind the door, and we were going to say, "Happy birthday!" And we heard this girl talking and said, "Yes, Mrs. Feil, yes, Mrs. Feil." We were like, and my mother wasn't there at all. They were just making fun. They were really mean.
Mm.
And they had lice, and we got lice in our hair. And then my father got a job in Cleveland, and that's when we moved in 1940. But before that, we lived in this house with my aunt and my grandmother and everyone. And I went to school, and I guess I was very lonely. So, and I don't remember my sister at all during this time, not at all.
Mm.
I remember Peter, this little boy Peter, that we played soldiers with. And there was a teacher there in school, and she would ask me all questions. And I would tell her everything. Because I guess I was so lonely, and I would come home, and they would make fun of me, and they'd say, "What did you tell Mrs. So-and-so today? Did you tell her this and this?" My aunt would do that, and Gretel. I don't remember that.
In German or English?
I don't remember. Probably in German. And then my aunt, my uncle got a job, and I guess they moved out. And
Uncle
Paul and Aunt Gretel. And I don't know what happened. Oh, then my other uncle.
Because Paul was your uncle by marriage.
My
Because Gretel is was
mother's sister.
yeah.
Her only sister, really. The other one was a stepsister, and Hermie.
But Hermie came over as well as Gretel.
Yeah, they got Hermie and her husband, whose name was Julius, and he was bald, and I was swatting flies. And I swatted a fly, and the head of the fly swatter came right on his head. And it was horrible. I felt terrible. Well, anyway, I remember that. So then we came to Cleveland in 1940. I was 8, I think.
So this was still before the U.S. because Germany invaded Poland in 41,
It
right?
was still before the U.S. because Pearl Harbor was
42.
41.
December
Wasn't it?
41?
I think so. And then, well, we lived in the home, and I was terrified because I'd never been with old people. But then it
Was this the first time your Opa had worked with elderly?
Mm-hmm. He'd always worked with children.
Uh-huh.
But he let me, they had chimes, ding dong dong, for the meals, and I was able to do the chime, boom, 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 and I had
So would you eat in the big hall with everyone else?
well, no, we had a room. We had 5 rooms in this home, and the first room was where we ate. So we didn't eat with everyone else. They brought our food in, you know, first, I guess, so that my parents could be free, and we ate in this. But they were never really there. They were always out working.
Mm-hmm.
And we would eat in the first room, and the second room was an office-like. The third room was my parents' bedroom, and the next room was my sister and I stayed. So the rooms were like one right after.
But just like in a regular hospital or...
Yeah.
So you guys had like a floor or a ward?
Yeah, we had like 4 rooms, and just 4 rooms that were connected. And but I got to do the chimes, and then when the war came, my father was an air raid warden, and I got to do the siren. That was fun. And then they had a victory garden.
Tell me about a victory garden.
Well, it was during the war, and they had a big land in the back. At that time, that area was farmland, and they had horses still. I mean, the milkman would come with horses at that time. And so my father used the land to begin a garden. And the residents of this home were still very able. So, and he started all this idea of rehabilitation, that they shouldn't just sit around, that they should do what they always did.
So why were they in the home?
Because they didn't have any family, and they were afraid they would die alone,
Mm-hmm.
like the people who live in this community.
So, but then the people that were staying in the home then, it was a Jewish home.
Mm-hmm.
And so for whatever reason they couldn't stay with their kids, so, but they needed meals cooked, but they could still get around and things like that.
Most of them were still able to get around. At that time people didn't drive, didn't have cars. But they needed, you had to be 65 or over to be in this home. You had to be Jewish to be in this home, or be married to someone who was Jewish. It was started by Jewish brothers, 4 Jewish people who didn't have funds, who couldn't live alone, who needed help. And it was named after Moses Montefiore, who was a Jewish philanthropist, an Italian Jewish philanthropist. And when we came in 1940, I think it was started in 1916. It had been going on for years. There were only 90 people in this home when my father took it as a director. But he brought in all this rehabilitation idea. That if you were a carpenter, you came and you opened up your carpenter shop. You brought your tools. If you were a shoemaker, and so he opened up all these shops. And he had one man, Mr. Lieberman, and he got to sweep the floor, and Mr. Lieberman was mad because he wanted to get paid. And so he knocked everyone, so when he swept, he woke everybody up. He came at 5 o'clock in the morning and woke everybody.
So everybody had to work who was there?
No, they didn't have to, but I think they wanted to. And then my father went, and when the war started, he got jobs he opened a sheltered workshop, like now they have for people who are retarded. They get piecework, but at that time, when we lived in New York, we got piecework. And every night, my mother would come home. She worked all day, and she would have a baby buggy filled with zippers. Filled with them, zippers. And we would make zippers at night. For hours, we would sit and make zippers in New York.
For extra money,
Yeah.
for the family.
Yeah.
Because you didn't get the money yourself.
We didn't have any money. You couldn't bring any money with you. When my parents came to America, they could not bring any money. They could bring their furniture, but no money.
And wasn't there a big crate that Oma brought with all the furniture, and then later she sold it as a chicken coop?
Did she really?
That's what she said. That's what I remember.
No. But I remember when we moved from one house in the Bronx to another, we had to carry chairs on our heads with the inside of them taken out. And we did. And and we didn't have much food at all. And we had to drink coffee. And when we went to school, when I was little, I think I was in kindergarten, and the teacher said, "Everyone who drinks coffee, stand up." And I was so ashamed that I did not stand up. And then one day in kindergarten, there was a little German boy that came, and the teacher said, "I'll give you a cookie if you talk to him." And I didn't do it because she was bribing me. And I was ashamed because he was the only one that could speak German, and me too, and I was ashamed. And then they taught us little dances like, I see you, tra-la-la-la. But I never knew my left from my right, because they made me write I'm left-handed with my right hand. So when you did I see you, you had to know your left from your right. And so that flubbed up. And what happened, when I was when we lived in Cedar Knolls, and this man would drive us, they had a driver who drove us to school every day. So the school was very far. So Cedar Knolls was way out, you know, it was this home for girls. And so I would make up all kinds of stories I would tell to this driver every day. And he knew they weren't true, but he listened to them as if they were true. And I was having a great time. And then in the school, they had this little dollhouse with silverware. And I stole some. And my father found out and he hit me terribly. And so I stole a spoon or something. I don't know why I stole a spoon.
How old were you?
6 or 7. I was younger than Carl. Stole a spoon. Yeah, he hit me very hard.
So you had been in the U.S. for about 2 years now. How was your English?
Well, I guess you learn it pretty fast in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm. Was it, when you moved back to New York later?
You mean when I was older? When I went to college?
Mm-hmm. Did you recognize anything or remember it all?
I lived with my aunt, this bad aunt, and who would, I shouldn't say that, she would always say mean things about my mother. And I lived in the same room with my grandmother, who never talked to me. Just sat there all the time. She had her prayer book, and she would always look at her eyes over her prayer book. But I lived with her, and I went to Columbia, and I was about 2 hours every day on the subway, in the morning and at night. I had to commute and make changes from Flushing to 116th Street in Manhattan. It was terrible, and I had no friends. Very lonely.
And you were getting your MSW? No.
No, I was getting my bachelor's degree, undergraduate degree. But that was when I came back. No, I didn't remember anything from New York.
When you went back to Germany, did you remember things?
Except Albertila had me stay in a little hotel in Schwabing, right near where he knew that, you know, that my parents came, that we lived in this Lehrlingsheim. And I knew the address of this Lehrlingsheim, but I didn't know where it was. And no, I didn't remember anything. But he had me stay in this hotel in that area, and I asked the lady, where is, and I forget the name of the street, where Lehrlingsheim was. And she said, I don't know. But if you go around this corner, maybe it's there. And somehow or other, I got there, and I found the street, and I found the house where I was born.
Wow.
And that house was offered, is now worth maybe $3 or $4 million. It's in a very fancy neighborhood, like the Greenwich Village of Munich. It was offered to my parents for $2,000.
When?
In the 1970s or 1980s, and they didn't buy it for $2,000. Just think, now it's worth millions.
How is it going back to Germany now?
Now, well, I've been there now for so many years, 15 years. When I first went, it was a little strange, and I was very resentful of the people. But I mean, they were my bosses, they hired me. So, and I remember I had one workshop in a place that was now a United Nations, what do they call it, a heritage thing, you know, it was the United Nations when they...
Oh, UNESCO.
Yeah, they make it a...
Cultural center or something.
Yeah, cultural center. And this was in a factory. And there was no heating. Everyone wore coats from this workshop. And it had been a factory where they made bombs, munitions for the war. And the daughter of the owner of the factory was there. And they made stuff for the war to kill, you know, and I looked outside, I walked around outside, and I saw all the graveyards, all the gravestones in memory of our wonderful son, and they had pictures, and they were all Nazis. And this daughter was saying there was never any Holocaust. There was never any, nothing ever happened. You know, like it's never happened.
Hmm. Was this Eastern Germany or Western?
This was Western Germany.
Hmm.
But in Eastern Germany, it was just very much harder for me to do the workshops because people didn't respond to me at all. But now I'm comfortable in Germany. I don't feel any...
Well, because Oma and Opa were still very German. And
Absolutely. And they went back. And my father wanted to get his MD. He went back to the University of Munich where he still knew a professor. And he wanted to get his MD at the age of 65. He went back. I remember because they came to see me in New York on their way. I was living in New York then. On their way for my father to, and he was accepted at the medical school, but he couldn't do it.
how come? Do you know?
Yeah, he was 60. How old? He was 65. Yeah, he was 65 years old, and the wine, and he couldn't do it. I don't think it was just too much. And then he tried it in Cleveland, at Western Reserve, and it didn't work.
No.
Well, he could have done it easier in Germany, because German was his mother tongue. But no, they went back, and they visited, my mother visited the nuns, where she went to school in Freiburg. And, yeah. So, that.
So you want to introduce yourself? You want to introduce
this
yourself?
This is what? This is what? Is this like a movie? Wait, what's this thing now?
Oh, that's a remote control. Here, sit with Grandma, and I'll show you. Here, sit with her, and you can see what you look like. How's that?
Okay.
So, who's with you, Mom?
Who is with me is my beautiful granddaughter, Claudia Warren Feil. You have another name? Beatrice. Claudia Beatrice Warren Feil, who is now 8 years old and in the 2nd grade.
Third.
And in the 3rd grade, and is a ballet dancer and very talented in many things. Also plays soccer.
And tennis.
And tennis. She takes tennis lessons. And she is a wonderful help to her mother.
Claudia, you want to tell about Grandma? What do you know about Grandma?
Okay, it's Grandma something Feil. What's your real name?
Naomi.
Okay. So Grandma Mimi, Naomi Feil. She's smart, beautiful, loving. She travels a lot. She's nice.
Does she send you postcards?
Yeah, a lot. I have a whole stash of them in my room. And I can't think of anything else. I can't think of anything else.
Can't think of anything else? You want to ask Grandma a question? That's what we're doing. You know, today's a special day for
It's your birthday.
That's right.
You want to say pause?
Okay.
In the home, in Montefiore home, when I was little, I could tell you more about that.
About the leather? About the... I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, that's where I was starting, about the...
Here, hang on one. Tell me about the rubber.
The rubber. Well, during the war, my father went to the war department in Cleveland, and he got bunches of rubber from tires that were, the rubber was attached to very hard paper, I guess it was tires that had blown out or something. And they needed pure rubber to make the tanks, to make the rubber for the tanks. So we got tons of this rubber, and he would bring it home. There was red rubber and there was black rubber. And he got it for the old people in the home, and if you got so many pounds of rubber, you would get like 10 cents for like 50 pounds of rubber, and you had to pull the rubber from the paper. Well, if you, and my sister and I, we were with the rubber workers. So the red rubber was real much easier to pull than the black rubber. And if you soaked the rubber overnight, it would pull much easier. So we would get up very early, like at 6 a.m. to get all the good rubber. And there was this lady, this little old lady, Mrs. Kohler. And to me, she was like 120 years old. She had a big hunchback. She was very thin. And she always got the rubber. No matter how early we were there, she would always get the good rubber, and she had it soaking by the time we got there. And we had hardly any of the good rubber left because Mrs. Kohler beat us all out. So we used to earn our pennies by pulling the red rubber. And that was during the war. And then my father had this garden where the people worked, and he had chickens, and he had an orchard during the war. Called it a victory garden, where the people planted food, and I would every Saturday morning I would make a talk at the synagogue. There was a temple in the home.
You would make the talk?
I did. Yeah, I made.
What would you say?
About how you should be good to your neighbor or something like that. I was good at speeches. And they loved
Even then?
me. Yeah.
Even
they
then?
They loved me making speeches. That's what I did.
Is that how you got started being an actress?
My mother would never, I wanted to, but my mother, what happened was there was a Bruno, there was a Karamu Theater in Cleveland, and this guy from Germany was the head of it.
Karamu was
the first black theater.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, Bruno something from Germany, who my mother knew. And I made a rhythm. I would always work every summer in the home with the people putting on plays. I wrote them, directed them, everything. And so I had the people who were very disoriented, now you would say they had Alzheimer's, and we made a rhythm band. And they would sit and play on the rhythm band, and we were going to go on TV. But before we went on TV, the television station had this Bruno, who was head of Karamu, come to see how it was going. And so he came and saw how it was going, and he asked me, he watched me direct, and he asked me if I would work with him at Karamu. And at that time, I think I was just about to go to college. I was 17. And I said, what would I do? He said, I don't know, just work with me. He just asked me to work with him, and I didn't do it. I was scared. And that would, if I had done it, I would have gone into theater more. And I never went into theater because my mother and father wouldn't, said that was, you don't go into theater, and that's only for bad people go into theater.
But you did go into theater anyway.
Not until much later. Never in my college. I never studied theater. I never did anything with theater.
So you went.
I got married.
Uh-huh.
New York, and I was very unhappy. And I went to a therapist. Then it was called a lay analyst. And he said, I was asking me what I wanted to do, I guess, and I said I always wanted to do theater. So right around the corner where we lived on Perry Street was Bank Street, which was where Herbert Berghoff's studio was. So the therapist said, why don't you just go there and take some classes? And that's how I got it. And then I went there, I took some classes, and with Bill Hickey, and that's how I got into theater.
So after You were in New York, going to school,
Columbia.
Columbia for undergraduate.
Hmm.
Because you went to Fordham for your...
No, I went to Oberlin my first year. First I went to Western Reserve a little bit. And then I went to Oberlin. And then I went to Columbia. There's the cat.
El Gato?
She shouldn't be outside.
Yeah, no. I should let her in.
Who?
El Gato!
You don't want her to disappear.
No.
How did you hear the cat?
Mom saw her.
Saw the cat, where? Oh, looking in the window.
And it was Bill Hickey that got me to get a divorce from Warren.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because he said...
I don't know how it was very weird. It's a weird time. Very weird. Very strange.
Then you ran into
Bill Hickey was very influential.
Mm-hmm. He also had me, well...
Wipe the clients.
Hmm?
Didn't he direct you to that?
Hmm?
Didn't he direct you?
That's one way of putting it.
No, it was a very difficult time
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Because you after that you moved back to Cleveland, right?
I came back to Cleveland, I went back to, then
With
I
two
came
little
back to New
girls.
York.
The two girls.
With the kids.
Oh yeah. And I moved and I got a job as a teacher, as a gym teacher in Harlem.
Wow.
Uh-huh. I mean, I had already graduated. I had my master's degree in social work, and I could have gotten my PhD in a year at Columbia, but I didn't do it because I was afraid of statistics. Could have easily, well, I couldn't easily, but anyway, I didn't do it. But I had the two little girls, and we moved, and I was a gym teacher for a year, and I had all these wonderful ideas. These were all people from Harlem. Most of them were immigrants. And I was going to and we took trips and things, and I ended up saying, get in your spot and stay in your spot. It was not as successful for me. And then I got a job in social work in the Bronx. And then we moved again, and I lived in the Bronx. No, we lived in, first we lived in Greenwich Village for a long time.
When did you do Off-Broadway theater?
That was, in 1960, 61, I tried out for this part and I got it.
So this was before or after you were divorced?
I didn't get divorced. It was when I was separated. In New York, you can't get a divorce. For some reason, I couldn't get a divorce. I had to go to Mexico, to Juarez.
Wow.
But, so we were just separated for a long time. For 3 years, I lived alone in New York with Vicki and Bay. And I worked during that time at different jobs in social work. And at first as a gym teacher and then in social work. And I commuted every day to the Bronx. And then I acted at night. I went to school and acted at night.
Who watched the girls?
We had someone stay. I had a woman stay over. And that was hard because it's hard getting somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very hard time. Very hard. Mm-hmm.
And then you moved to Cleveland?
And
What brought you
then
back to
finally,
Cleveland?
I wasn't doing well in acting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just getting into relationships that were not helpful at all.
Mm-hmm.
That were bad relationships. Which is really why I didn't get further into acting. Because I was screwing it up. You know, getting involved, and it wasn't helpful. So I finally decided I wasn't successful in New York. I wasn't making it. I could have gotten more jobs, I think, because I had got a couple, but that I would have had to travel. I'd had to do summer stock, and I just didn't do it. And Vicki and Beth were little, and I couldn't take it. Would have been very bad for them to take them with me to summer stock. So I just didn't. I just came back to Cleveland. Seemed like the best thing to do. And then I tried theater, but I was not successful either.
In Cleveland?
At the Playhouse. I just didn't know enough. See, when I took the acting classes with Bill Hickey, right away I was so good. He never taught me how to do anything. You know, I just did it without knowing what I was doing or how I was doing it. And so I had no technique to rely on. So when I came to Cleveland, I didn't have any, you know, I didn't know how to put an audition or anything because I'd never learned it. I thought I was wonderful, but I had the talent, but I didn't know how to work on a play or anything like that.
Because he just didn't give you the...
He never taught me that, no. I was good right away. I was like a polished actress right away without knowing what I was doing. I had nothing, which is very bad, but I didn't know that. And so that's why I was not successful in Cleveland.
Yeah, he didn't, and in the end he didn't serve you very well.
Not at all. Not at all. Very bad. He gave me nothing. But it was good that I got divorced from Warren, which I never would have done. I wouldn't have the guts to do without that.
But Bill Hickey... Well, didn't you go on auditions and things like that?
I tried, yeah. But I didn't have I auditioned for Second City when Second City was just beginning, and I'm good at improvising, and I would have been so good. But they asked me, did you have experience? And I said no, and I said, well, they didn't even give me a chance after I said no. It's stupid. I just screwed up every single time. That's what happened. Because I would have been very good at Second City, and they would have hired me if I had said, well, I had experience with this, and that, but I didn't. So I screwed myself up. You know, there were certain times in my life when I could have gone into theater, like with Bruno Frank, that was his name, or with Second City, but at each point, I somehow lost the thing up. It never worked, so maybe it shouldn't have worked, you know. So anyway, that's what happened. And I came back to Cleveland and I worked at a job. And
doing what?
well, for my social work. I worked with the housing department for a while. And then I met Dad. And then I just worked at Montefiore then with the special service department. And that's where slowly I developed validation.
So did you have a lot of freedom at Montefiore because you were working with the severely disoriented?
Yeah, because no one bothered me. No one cared what I was doing. And even my father, he didn't know what I was doing, neither did my mother. And I had students from the university. They knew more what I was doing. But no one wanted to. Because
you were like a field.
Like an adjunct instructor is what I was. Yeah, and so yeah. Except there was a head nurse that didn't like what I was doing. She wanted to get rid of me.
What was her name?
Mrs. Weinstein.
Was there a physician there as well, or? There
was a psychiatrist. And when my father left, the new director wanted to get rid of me. I think he thought I wanted his job or something, which I did not. But since I was the director's daughter, or the former director's daughter, he wasn't comfortable with me. So it was a very hard time. He took away my office, he took away my phone, you know, little by little he took away everything. So I finally left.
Started your own thing?
Well, I had workshops at that time. I had a lot of them at that time. Yeah. So That's about it.
So you've done a couple of workshops since then?
Couple, yeah.
How
Well,
many?
Well, the workshop started actually with Dad's film. We did a film called When Generations Meet. And it was about kids from high school, from Heights High School, who were dropouts. And so that they wouldn't drop out from school, there was a program that they would learn how to work with old people. So I had these kids and I taught them how to work with the old people. And that was on television. There was a film called When Generations Meet. And this lady, they had just begun the offices on aging. Aging was just beginning at that time to be really a big thing. This was in the 60s, the early 70s maybe. And a woman who was head of the Department on Aging saw this film on TV, and she called me up. And you were very little then. And she said, oh, how would you like to work? And I said, oh, no, I can't do that. I have little children. You know, it meant she wanted me to do workshops, which would mean traveling in Ohio, just in Ohio. And Dad said, oh, why don't you call her back? And I did call her back. And then I started, you know, working just in Ohio. You would go to school and I would drive to Columbus or wherever these area agencies were and do a workshop and come home. And I did that for a while, and then someone saw me and said, how would you like to do a workshop in Missouri? And someone from Missouri said, how would you like to workshop in Kansas? And so little by little the workshops grew, just by word of mouth. And by that time you were older, but Kenny unfortunately was little. He was in high school still, and that time I was doing a lot of workshops, which was not good, because I wasn't home very much. But I think with you, you were away, I think you were, when I started doing a lot of workshops. Because I was always home, I never worked full time.
But do you really think Kenny was upset by that?
It was not good for him, no.
Has he ever said that?
Yeah. I think he said it would have been better if I had been more with him. Yeah.
I would think in high school that's not.
He was pretty much alone at that time. I think he needed someone. I really do.
We should call him and ask him.
Yeah, I think I did once. I think he said it would have been good if I had been there more. I mean, there's no question about it.
I think there is a question about it.
All right, we could ask. But that was what happened. And I remember one night I came home and I had brought, it was from Texas, and I bought a big, a mache thing you hang up, a piñata. And I thought you would like it. And I came home and said, hey, hey. And you didn't pay any attention to it at all. Neither you nor Kenny. I don't know why. And this was after I was away a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. I think I was in San Antonio. And you were very little then. You were about 8 or 9. What was that? Well, anyway. Do you remember that, coming home with a piñata?
Not really.
No?
No.
I do. I was very excited, and you didn't even say boo. You didn't even look at it. Neither you nor Kenny.
Disappointed.
Yeah, well, I
My
figured
mom went to San Antonio and all I got was this.
it was a beautiful piñata. I still have it.
I know. I think I remember it from later, not from when you gave it to us. Is my guess.
Well. So, I think that's enough. I can't think of anything else, don't you think?
There is not much time left on the tape. You've gone through a whole tape.
Well, you have most of what was in Germany that I recall. You know, I remember seeing people saying Heil Hitler. I do remember that as a little kid. And I remember going to Breisach as a little kid.
Oh, after to visit?
No, when I was 2. My mother took me to Breisach to visit her mother. And I remember the big cuckoo clock on the big clock on the wall.
In Munich too, there's the big clock where the
Oh, that's yeah.
what's it called? It's not the
But we never
Glocken
saw
something.
that. I don't think my mother and father went out to very much from their little. See, I think in Germany, there's only usually one street where all the Jews were. And it was like a ghetto, and the Jews lived. I think it was partly voluntary too. They wanted to, and the synagogue was there, and all the Jews. I don't think my parents went very much to the center of Munich, because most of their life was in this home and in this suburb called Schwabing, which is a beautiful suburb where the university is and the beautiful English garden is, Englische Garten. It's a beautiful area. And I don't think they went very much out of that area.
Down to the last few seconds. Anything else you want to?
No. When I go back there now, I see the university, you know, where a man took me to where my father went to the university. A professor who came to my workshop. And I told him that my father studied psychology and philosophy, and so he went with me to the university and showed me where my father studied. And that was kind of neat. And finding the house where I lived without any direction. Nobody told me which way to go. I just got there. I don't know how I got there. So, yeah. That's all.